Right now, I'm challenging myself to see if I can make 128 Regulation H teams that are each different from one another over the course of 128 days. Why 128, you might ask? At the end of the 128 days, we're going to do something special where we battle every team against each other in a single elimination bracket to see which team emerges on top. There will be some competitively strong teams, there will be some gimmick teams, and there will be some probably a good number of goofs and gaffs in there, so if you want to follow through to the end, subscribe so that you can keep up with each day. But without further ado, let's move on to day 117. Alright everybody, welcome back to another video, and in today's video we are going to be going over an Ampharos team, which is a plus team, which we did have plus soul all the way back towards the start, but this is a different variation of the plus team, where we are more so giving into the entirety of the plus strategy and the things that exist in the game that make plus its own unique little strategy. Well, and minus. Plus and minus are the two abilities. Because what plus and minus do is that if there is an active ally that has this ability or the minus ability on the field, you get a choice specs boost, which is pretty nice. So we can use our other Pokemon that has the minus ability, which is Minun, which we'll get into in a second, in order to make it so that Ampharos does a choice specs extra amount of damage, and we have max damage investment. So hopefully Ampharos is going to be dishing out some damage. In order to also increase our damage, though, we have the option to go for the Meteor Beam, which will raise our special attack, and then on the second turn, whenever it consumes our Power Herb, it will unleash the 120 base power Meteor Beam, so that we get another special attack boost on top of that, which combos with our plus to make a 2.25 time ability boost. And then we also have the Dazzling Gleam to combine with our Terra Fairy, and just Thunderbolt for some good stab, and we're going to need Protect because Ampharos does not want to be taking attacks whenever it's out of position, so we're going to Protect with Ampharos to hopefully avoid those kind of things. But going into our support here, we have Minun, and Minun is going to be serving a very similar role to when we had Plusle, except Minun is a little bit more defense tanky than Plusle, and also Minun has some different moves, but we're running basically the same moves, I think, as when we were running Plusle, as we have the Entrainment. And what Entrainment does is that it allows us to copy our ability onto any Pokemon, so we could put the plus ability onto either one of our 4 Pokemon that is going to be next to Plusle at the time, and they will acquire minus, which means that they will get a boost, and we can also use Entrainment into the opponent in order to disrupt them by taking away their ability and kind of giving them a useless one. As well as we also have the Helping Hand to give us another multiplier for boosting our damage, and we have the Volt Switch for whenever we need to do our pivoting, and we are Covert Cloak so that we are avoiding the Fake Outs mostly on Minun, but we're also Terra Flying in case we need to dodge a ground type move, because a lot of Pokemon on this team are weak to ground, but you're really never going to use your Minun Terra. Next up on the team, we're going to be slotting in Probopass, and it's, as I said, a bit of a bold idea for us to have so many Pokemon weak to ground, especially Pokemon Quad weak to ground, and fighting in Probopass. But Probopass does some pretty unique things here, and the fact that we have the move Magnetic Flux. And everybody in the comments tell me if you knew what Magnetic Flux did before I'm about to click on it here, because I did, only because I'm insane. But if you ask the average competitive Pokemon player, they're not going to be able to tell you what Magnetic Flux does, because this is an extremely circumstantial move that is the only move in the game that kind of acts like it. It's because it raises the defense and special defense of an ally with the plus or minus ability by 1. So it's kind of like coaching, except instead of an attack boost, you get a special defense boost, but only if your ally has the plus or minus ability. And there's, as far as I can think off the top of my head, there are no other moves in the game that work like this, that you can only use them on Pokemon with certain abilities. So I have no idea why this move exists, but it is kind of funny that it does. But we're going to be using Magnetic Flux to try and make Ampharos tankier to solve the fact that it doesn't like taking hits. And then Probopass also has its own form of offense in the Iron Defense and the Body Press, so that we can get super defense tanky against Pokemon that are not special attackers, and then hit them with our body press. And then we're also Terra-fighting to get rid of some weaknesses that we had before, but also to give a stab on the body press. And then since we are sturdy, which means that we can always take at least one attack, given it's not a multi-hit attack, we also have the Pain Split, which can be very useful for dealing with the tankier mons that don't like to go down in one hit, because Ampharos, needs to try and hit them for a lot of damage. And then Pain Split also gives us some health back, so it makes it easier for Probopass to stay on the field, and we have the leftovers just for a little bit of HP recovery over time. Fourth on the list, I decided to slot on Rotom Fan because we obviously needed a Pokemon that is immune to ground, but I wanted a Pokemon that is immune to ground, but kind of doesn't value its ability. So Rotom Fan is kind of an awkward puzzle piece to slot in on this team, but we can give Rotom Fan Plus, and then it's an electric type that still doesn't get hit by ground type moves. So it's one of the uses for Rotom Fan. It finally gets to take advantage of its ability, even though it never really gets to take advantage of its ability. But with Rotom Fan, we can Terrestrialize into Ghost in order to boost our Shadow Ball as stab, and then we already have the Air Slash and the Volt Switch as our stabs, and then with the Choice Specs, we can lock into one of those moves and then make it super, super damaging, along with if Plusle decides to put Plus onto this Pokemon, we will have another multiplier on top of that. So a lot of multipliers there, hopefully a lot of damage. And then lastly, in the fourth slot, we also have Trick, which means that we can put Choice Specs onto a Pokemon that does not enjoy having Choice Specs in order to try and lock them from either using their damaging item or their defensive items. If they have Choice Specs, then they'll be locked into a move, and it will be much harder for them to try to protect out in front of Ampharos or to try and click Recover in front of Ampharos. It's just nice to have Rotom Fan tricking Choice Specs into a Mon. Next up on the team, we're going to be including Sinistcha because I wanted a Trick Room Mon, since Ampharos and Probopass are both relatively slow Pokemon, Minun and Rotom not so much, but Sinistcha able to set up our Trick Room, which means all of our slower Mons will be moving faster than the faster Mons while we're inside of Trick Room, and then we're also a Grass type, so we resist Ground, which means that we can get off our Stab Machigacha to maybe get a burn into the opponent to chip them, but also so that we're getting a bunch of healing, and if we use Minun to put plus on Sinistcha, then Sinistcha can also benefit from Probopass's Magnetic Flux, and it could be a better friend for Ampharos because it can activate Ampharos' ability, and we also have the Shadow Ball as our other stab for if we are plus with another plus Pokemon, and we have the Life Dew in order to heal ourselves. And since Hospitality is an ability that activates only once we enter the field, it makes perfect sense for us to use Minun to overwrite Sinistcha's ability because it has no use for it after it enters the field, and the Citrus Berry just gives us a little bit of extra health, and Terrafire helps us negate a lot of our previous weaknesses. And lastly on the team, I decided to slot on Armarouge, which was a bit of an interesting choice, as I mentioned, we already had 3 Pokemon that were super weak to ground. We added a 4th Pokemon that's weak to ground, but Armarouge can help negate that a lot better because if the opponent has Earthquake, then we can go for Wide Guard in order to block it, and if they have a single target, then we can just use the Focus Sash to always take one hit and then get off the Trick Room so that we can hit them back with something better, or we can just go into our Terra Grass, and then because we are Flash Fire, we do not fear being hit by a Fire type move, which is pretty important. But on top of that, we can throw back a Heat Wave into the opponent in order to cook them a little bit, and we can click the Psyshock into them just for some stab psychic type damage. But yeah, that's going to be a very basic gist of the team. Let's get into some battles. Alright, so first up we have a battle against a Dozo team where they can exert a lot of pressure with Annihilate and King Gambit in the back if they end up using Dozo mode. So we immediately lead with Sinistcha and Minun here as the opponent leads Annihilate and Dondozo, and they decide to click U-turn into Sinistcha, getting some chip into us, and immediately go into Tatsugiri to activate their Dozo mode, and Dondozo goes for Order Up into Sinistcha, but Sinistcha takes it pretty well, and we get to eat our Citrus Berry there. Dondozo does get an attack boost, but we get to Volt Switch the Dozo, so even if they had gone for Earthquake there with Dozo, then Minun wouldn't have been able to get out there fast enough.
But now we have the Trick Room up, and we have Probopass in position, which is pretty good. And Probopass is just going to use an Iron Defense because we're not expecting too much at this point, even though Dondozo's unaware. We could use the Iron Defense for after the Dondozo is gone, because we're planning for it to click Earthquake here, which will do a lot of damage to Probopass, bringing it down to the Sturdy, and everything gets leftovers. But then we Pain Split the Dondozo, bringing us up a lot more HP, and unfortunately, the Dondozo is going to live the Machagacha from Sinistcha, and they go for the Earthquake again. So Probopass is going to go down as Dondozo gets some more HP from the leftovers. But now I can bring in Armarouge here, and the Dondozo is going to go down to the Machagacha, and we get some Psyshock damage into Tatsugiri as Dragonite now comes in. And I predict that since we only have one turn of Trick Room left, and I know from the team sheet that this Tatsugiri is not a Choice Scarf variant, that the Dragonite's probably going to try and attack into a Pokemon here, but we can safely Terrastalize into Fire, and then we can go for the double Trick Room, because Terra Blast will bring us down, and then we Trick Room to break the previous Trick Room, and then we Trick Room with Armarouge to set up a brand new Trick Room. So now we have 4 more turns of Trick Room. Dragonite tries to go for the Expanding Force to take out Sinistcha, but doesn't get it, and then Sinistcha drains a lot of health with Machagacha, taking out Tatsu, and now it is Dragonite and Annihilate, as Minun is going to return to try and save Sinistcha here, as we get some Psyshock damage back into Dragonite, as Annihilate chooses to lock into Coaching, which it would have, if it chose to lock into the final Gambit there, then Armarouge would go down to its Focus Sash, and Dragonite would probably take us out with the Extreme Speed. But then Minun is here, and it can click Volt Switch into Dragonite, so that would be the game. But that is not what happens here. Armarouge is just able to click Psyshock into the Dragonite, and now there's only an Annihilate that is able to Coaching, which means that it cannot use any more moves. And so we get the Shadow Ball Psyshock combination into Annihilate, taking it out of the game. Here we have a Typhlosion Sun team, where they do have some defensive components in like the Clefairy for the redirection, and then Primarina and Kingambit are pretty tanky in their own rights, especially since the Kingambit is Assault Vest. So we immediately see them lead with Typhlosion and Whimsicott, and we have Armarouge and Sinistcha, and this combination is pretty safe because the Typhlosion either has to choose to click Eruption, which means that it will activate the Flash Fire on Armarouge, or it can choose to click Shadow Ball in order to do super effective damage into each target, but it can't KO both targets is the important thing here. So they do click the Moonblast into Armarouge and then the Shadow Ball in order to get Armarouge's Focus Sash, but this allows Sinistcha to pretty safely get up the Trick Room, and we bring in Ampharos, and because the Whimsicott is Prankster, and we know that it can Encore, we don't want it to Encore us into the Trick Room, so we bring in Minun here, but also to activate the Plus on Ampharos, and Ampharos goes for the Meteor Beam, able to take out the Typhlosion and get the special attack buff. But now Kingambit is going to enter the field, and we protect with Ampharos because we do not want to be encored into Meteor Beam, and Minun is going to take a Kowtow Cleave here, nearly getting rid of all of its health, but with Entrainment we can get rid of the Prankster on Whimsicott so that we cannot be encored into the Protect, which allows Ampharos to go Terra Fairy here, which I think is kind of a bit of a misplay because then it makes it so that we're weak to the Iron Head, whereas we could just cycle the Sinistcha in order to keep the Ampharos pretty healthy from being hit by the Kowtow Cleave. But we Volt Switch Kingambit there, and we bring in Sinistcha to heal up some health, making Ampharos pretty much full health, and we dealt some pretty good Dazzling Gleam damage to them. And then we bring Minun back in, and since Ampharos is about to move, we do take the Iron Head, and thankfully we don't flinch. We get off the Dazzling Gleam that we need to deal enough damage into the Kingambit. But now we bring in Sinistcha to try and heal up Ampharos just a little bit as Clefairy redirects for Whimsicott, and Whimsicott tries to take out Ampharos. And Minun then returns to the field looking to take the sec turn as Clefairy redirects. And we just Machagacha in order to spread move, because if we get the burn, then we could chip them down. But the Machagacha still gives us a bunch of health. At this point, their only damage output is Whimsicott, so they're going to really struggle to try and beat Sinistcha. But we missed the Machagacha that we need to pick up KO and Whimsicott just to get more damage on the Clefairy. And they go for Helping Hand Moonblast, but that isn't anywhere near enough, and they would need another miss here in order to have a chance at winning the game. But Sinistcha is just going to be able to clean up with the Machagacha. Lastly, we have a battle against a sand team here where they have Gastrodon, and Gastrodon is one of the more difficult ground types for us to remove, because whenever I was making this team, I was thinking that Garchomp would be the most deadly ground type for the opponent to be using, which is why we have Terra Fairy on the Ampharos, but Gastrodon is an entirely different beast here. So we lead Sinistcha and Rotom Fan here, looking to see Gastrodon, and we do in fact see Gastrodon and Rillaboom in the lead, and they immediately retreat into Goldengo, probably thinking we're going to go for a Grass-type move, and they U-turn into Sinistcha to bring Tyranitar onto the field, but this gives us the ability to go for the Trick Room with Sinistcha, as we tricked away the Miracle Seed that was on Rillaboom, so we're nerfing its Grass-type damage for the future, and we also gave it a choice spec so it will not be able to consistently fake out. But we hard swamp in Probopass here because it probably won't take too much damage, and we try to Shadow Ball into Goldango, but it looks like even if it hadn't Terrestrialized, Goldango would still live that pretty safely. Rock Slide comes out, and Shadow Ball is able to pick up the KO into Sinistcha, as here Probopass is going to go up to 100% health because of the leftovers and grassy terrain, but they swap Tyranitar out here for Gastrodon, seeing as now Sinistcha is dead. Their main win con of Gastrodon is in a pretty safe spot, but we brought Ampharos back to the field just to protect, as Goldango just protects, and we use Magnetic Flux on Gastrodon, or on Ampharos, to make Ampharos more tanky against Gastrodon, and we also go for the Terra Fairy so that we're no longer weak to the Earth Power, and Earth Power only does that much, which is pretty nice. Does Spadef drop us though, which is a little annoying, but we get to take out Goldango with the Terra Fairy Dazzling Gleam, and we get one more turn of Trick Room, but Rillaboom is going to enter, and we just protect with Ampharos so that we're not getting hit by the Fake Out, and we get another Magnetic Flux, but here we actually see that Gastrodon is Clear Smog, which means that it can wipe away all these Magnetic Flux boosts that we were working on, so that plan is kind of out the window to make ourselves so tanky that Gastrodon can't take us out. The Rillaboom just locked itself into Fake Out, as we saw, so it's swapped out in order to get rid of the fact that the Choice Specs locked it into a useless move, and Tyranitar returns to the field, so we click Meteor Beam with Ampharos here, just to try and get damage into whatever swapped in, which ended up being Tyranitar, but we Magnetic Flux again, and the Gastrodon this time just went for the Earth Power into Probopass, but Probopass, all things considered, took that pretty well. But here we protect Ampharos again, and Tyranitar goes for the Rock Slide, and the Gastrodon goes for the Clear Smog again, but we get to just flat out Body Press into Tyranitar, taking it out, which is probably the turn I should have made earlier whenever I knew that Rillaboom was going to swap out after going for the Fake Out. We could have just body press the Tyranitar and not had to worry about that. But now Rillaboom is going to return to the field, which means that it resets the grassy terrain, and it goes for the Wood Hammer, but it's a little bit weakened because it doesn't have its Miracle Seed, and we get the Dazzling Gleam damage in, and Ampharos is going to get put to sleep by the Yawn here, as we Pain Split the Gastrodon in order to try and take out some more damage on it, but also so that Probopass will survive another Earth Power from it. Wood Hammer comes into Ampharos again, as Ampharos throws out a Dazzling Gleam, which is going to KO the Rillaboom, and we try to get Body Press into Gastrodon, but the Sand Chip and then Grassy Terrain is making things all kind of funky except for Probopass. Probopass loves the current situation. Ampharos falls asleep, and they finally get that Clear Smog onto Ampharos, getting rid of the stats, and we get some Body Press chip into the Gastrodon there in order to better remove it, but now we can swap in Rotom Fan, who you probably forgot about was in the pack, and is our win condition, to the Gastrodon, because Probopass can do anything it wants. It's just Gastrodon is going to really struggle, especially once we trick that Miracle Seed onto Gastrodon, and we steal the Gastrodon's leftovers. Gastrodon's going to have way less recovery once this grassy terrain runs out, and Body Press is doing more damage because we got that defense boost, and Shadow Ball from the Rotom is going to finally finish off the Gastrodon. Oh yeah, that was the plus Ampharos team / Ampharos kind of needs friends in order to help it out. And Ampharos, I kind of tried to make the poster child of the plus strategy here, but I could definitely see them in the future releasing a Pokemon with plus that's like an electric dragon type, for example, and has way better stats than Ampharos, that really pushes the actual plus strategy with like Magnetic Flux and using Minun as a support Pokemon with Helping Hand to better help that plus Pokemon. I think that the Game Freak is just kind of afraid of making a Pokemon that is accidentally way too cracked with the plus ability, because it could be really cracked, but right now it's really just kind of okay / not that great. But thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked it, maybe consider leaving a like on the video, and even consider subscribing, because both of those things would help me out an absolute ton, and I will see you in the next one. Thank you.